When Sister Location first released back in 2016, it was met with very mixed opinions from the fanbase. It was a game which was fundamentally different from its predecessors in many different ways. Its setting was far more futuristic, its characters now had full voice acting, and it opted to be much more of a story-based game rather than the previous installment's resource management style of gameplay. Perhaps the biggest difference this game had with its predecessors, though, was how the nights were structured. In all the previous FNaF games before Sister Location, the nights were structured in a very similar manner. The game introduced the player to a core gameplay loop which they had to follow, and every single night something new was thrown into the mix to make that loop more difficult to do consistently. Typically, the fifth night existed to act as one final test of the player's skill, either by keeping all of the game's current threats on a higher difficulty, or taking the FNaF 4 approach and introducing something brand new which functions based on skills the player had already learned. Sister Location threw this entire night structure out the window, opting instead to make each new night its own individual experience. Each night in Sister Location is a sort of mini-game with brand new mechanics and characters to deal with that the player has to keep track of. To some, this was a breath of fresh air. To others, this went against a ton of what made FNaF fun in the first place. Regardless of those opinions, though, there was one thing I feel Sister Location did absolutely perfectly, and that was the fifth night. No, not that fifth night. I'm talking about this fifth night. The secret Ennard fight at the end of Sister Location is, in my opinion, an absolute culmination of everything that has made me love the FNaF series in the first place. It has everything. It has fantastic lore, a tense gameplay loop which stresses me out every single time I play it, and it has, in my opinion, one of the best musical tracks to come out of the series. I feel like in discussions about the series, this particular night does not get nearly the amount of attention it deserves, and I'm hoping to shed some light on it today. Starting with possibly the most important part of what makes a good night: the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, the FNaF series has always been known for its extremely difficult challenges which go alongside the horror. Part of what made these games so appealing in the first place is the amount of tension the player feels during a really stressful night, trying to keep track of everything happening around them while managing their resources. I believe that the fifth night in Sister Location grasps this idea just as well, if not better, than many of the games that came before it. The Ennard boss fight at the end of the game is a very finely tuned experience, which borrows the best parts of previous installments to make the best challenge possible. Returning from the previous games are the doors and power management of FNaF 1, the audio-based tracking of FNaF 4, and the reactionary gameplay style of FNaF 2. It's clear that when designing this night, Scott had learnt a lot from the previous game's mechanics, and handpicked the best parts of each one of them to create a very well-rounded, challenging experience. The returning power mechanic from FNaF 1 is far more fine-tuned in this game, draining at a rate which only allows the player to win with just barely enough power to win on a good attempt. This makes the night so stressful because it forces the player to constantly second guess if checking a camera or closing a door will even be worth it without being absolutely sure of where Ennard is going to be. But how can you tell where Ennard is going to be without wasting power by looking for him on your cameras? Well, that's where the audio system returning from FNaF 4 comes into play. Like in FNaF 4, you can actually hear on your headphones which direction Ennard will be approaching from when trying to get in. This system allows the player to listen very closely, using the small audio cues of Ennard moving to find his location without needing to waste power tracking him on the camera. This system works very well for power management, but it also works even better for the purpose of closing Ennard out of the room in time. The last major thing coming back from the previous FNaF installments is the sort of reactionary-based gameplay of FNaF 2. When Ennard arrives at a door, you get a very small window to actually close it in time to survive. This window starts off decently generous, but the moment you hit 4 AM, it becomes next to nothing. For this reason, a lot of the night is spent panicking, trying to close the doors as quickly as possible. And that's why the audio is so important to this night, because sometimes taking the time to check the camera, even for a second, to make sure he's at your door can straight up get you killed. You need to have quick reflexes to go with your listening skills, because slipping up or being too slow means instant death during this night. These three major mechanics perfectly come together to make an experience that is both really challenging, but also fair. It's a difficult juggling act between three major mechanics, which both complement one another, but also act to make the night extremely challenging. What I love about this night too is how the difficulty of it ramps up the later the night goes, with Ennard shifting into high gear at 4 AM. It's a perfect test of the player's different skills they develop over the night, and it makes the power management side of it all the more crucial as you try to get by closing the doors only if absolutely necessary. If we're talking about challenge alone, this night is one of the most solid we've gotten in the whole series. However, challenge alone isn't what makes the FNaF series so good. Next, we're going to talk about the story. The fifth night in Sister Location is an example of, in my opinion, some of the best storytelling we've seen in the entire series. What makes this night so interesting to me is that it has its own storyline, which we actually see unfold as the night progresses. It's a storyline which allows us to understand the situation we're trapped in, and understand the context for almost the entire game. And it starts as soon as we arrive in the private room.
Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you believe me?
When we first enter the private room, we're immediately greeted to a place we've never seen before, and we hear the sound of Baby being caught off guard. Her plan had failed, we didn't listen to her, and now we're stuck in this small, isolated space far away from her. As the night begins to settle in, Baby continues to speak with us, and there's something interesting I notice as she talks. I'll play the stuff she says, and I'll see if you guys notice it too.
Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you believe me? I thought you liked me. We need you so that we can leave. We need you so that we can hide. You must let us inside the room.
Did you notice it? If not, I can't blame you because it's extremely subtle. At the beginning of the night, Baby is caught off guard by the player's decision to not listen to her. She tries to reason with you, and while she does, she continues to use the pronouns I, as if she wants to keep up the facade she's built for herself. But as the night continues, she gives up on the lie she's built to deceive the player and begins using the we and us pronouns, revealing completely that she's been a part of Ennard all along. This dialogue is really interesting for more than just this subtle reveal, though. It also shows us Ennard's motives for trying to kill us.
If they find us like this, we won't be able to try again.
If they find us like this, we won't be able to try again. This line stands out to me so much because it tells us so much about Ennard's motives. In the previous games, we always vaguely understood why the animatronics wanted to kill us, but in this game, it's much more personal than it ever was. This plan that Ennard put together, their plan to scoop you and wear your body, it was all or nothing. Everything hinged on the plan working, because if they failed at any point, then they would never be free from the facility and would most likely be destroyed for what they turned themselves into for the plan to work. During this night, Ennard is desperate to leave, and that desperation shows in everything that happens. The voice lines become more desperate, with Baby explaining time and time again how much they need to leave and how the player won't die. This desperation comes from more than just the voice lines though, with the gameplay coming into effect as well. Someone playing the night who's unaware of the story unfolding would probably see Ennard's aggression at 4 AM just being a result of the game becoming more challenging, and they'd partially be right. But I feel like Ennard's aggression at this point gets a whole new meaning with context. The aggression Ennard shows at this point in the game is like one last desperate attempt to get into your office before they are never able to try again. And the aggression shown at this hour isn't the only telling sign of this. Something else very unexpected happens the moment the clock hits 4 AM, which tells us all we need to know about Ennard and the player's situation. In one last desperate attempt to convince you to let them into the room, Ennard begins using the voice of Elizabeth Afton. This not only shows the sheer level of panic they're in to resort to this, but also reveals the reason the character we play as went into the sister location in the first place. He's here to be reunited with his sister who was killed by Baby. His sister who is now leading the amalgamation, which wants nothing more than to get into the office and kill him. It's a tragic reveal, and it's one which makes the story of Sister Location make so much more sense than it did before we discovered this. All of this build-up, the desperation of Ennard, your desperation to get to the end, they all build up eventually until the night ends. And you're left with this last line as your send-off.
I will find a way out.
And with that, I should be done with this video. But I can't help myself but talk about some other little things I just adore about this night. So with that said, I'd like to just bring up some little things that don't really have a place for them to go on their own. So this is the section I've decided to dedicate to just the little things that I couldn't really find a place for in the main video, but I've just decided to put here because I still really wanted to talk about them. Starting with the music. The musical track that plays during this night in particular is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best track we got from any FNaF game. Watch Your Six is a song which just sounds incredibly sinister, with its slow tempo and its use of very mechanical sounding instruments. It makes the whole night have this dark vibe around it, like you really did stumble into a place you shouldn't have and have to deal with the consequences of that. It's no wonder that Riskin came back to compose so much more music for the series, because this song really stood out above anything else used in Sister Location. Another small detail I love about this night is the FNaF 4 Easter egg hidden behind the wall code. Seeing the secret cameras over the FNaF 4 room, as well as the little Fredbear plush, allowed for some extremely interesting theories to be formed, and gave us some proper confirmation of events from previous games. And one final piece of miscellaneous material I love about this night is just Ennard. I know that he appears in more than just this night, but I just really love the way he looks. He's this massive amalgamation of animatronics trying to put together what vaguely looks like a human body, wearing the closest thing to a human face they could get before they got the real deal. I've always interpreted Ennard's design as being the animatronics within him trying to make themselves look as human as possible, even though it's such a difficult task for them to accomplish. I find this detail to be especially cool with the context of Pizzeria Sim, where Ennard no longer tries to keep up a humanoid form, seeing as they were ejected from Michael's body and their plan already succeeded. Either way though, with all those out of the way, I suppose now it's time to properly close this off and give my final thoughts on this, since I feel like this video's dragging on quite a bit now. Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location was a game which received a lot of mixed opinions upon its release, and for the most part, I can definitely understand why. I really feel, however, that the fifth night of this game is one of the most painfully underrated aspects of any FNaF game we've had to date. It's an extremely challenging experience, which tells a tragic narrative that slowly unfolds before the player, letting them understand how dire both them and their threat's situation are before the end of the night. It's an experience I highly recommend to anyone who's a fan of the series who hasn't tried it yet, and I wish that more games in the series had nights like this one. Either way though, I had a lot of fun writing and making this video, and I hope to hear what you guys think in the comments below about what the best nights in the series are. Until next time, I'll see you all later.